Hey, what's up, guys? I'm King here. Yeah, so, stuff happened yesterday. I tried making a video yesterday, but it didn't quite work out. It said there was an error. So today goes better. So we're just gonna be watching Bendy's Dark Origins from the game Dearest. And let's just get started.
Gaijin Goomba here. So not that long ago, an indie company called The Meatly released a new horror game to PC called Bendy and the Ink Machine. So let me guess, it's a survival horror where you're running away from sentient inanimate objects that hunt you down, all the while you're trying to unravel this giant story as to what exactly happened, mixing in plenty of jump scares, horrific imagery, and uncanny levels of creepy with the antagonists? Yeah, I feel I'm starting to see a holding pattern when it comes to indie horror games these days. But there's one thing Bendy and the Ink Machine has that so many similar horror games don't. Style. This is the first time I've ever seen a horror game with such a cartoony art direction. Everything you interact with looks like it came right out of Disney in the 1920s, and to be completely fair, that's a level of creepy that hasn't been tapped for its horror potential. As for the story, you play the role of Henry, a retired animator who gets a letter from his old friend and boss named Joey True, inviting him back to the old studio to, show him something. In Chapter 1, Moving Pictures, you search the decrepit studio for whatever it is Joey wants you to see, which ends up being a giant underpowered contraption called the Ink Machine. Having little else to do, you begin looking around trying to figure out how to get the machine up and running, but it's then you start to realize something sinister is going on. You see messages sprawled on the walls like, dreams do come true, and who's laughing now? You also walk into a room with what looks like the hollowed out body of Boris, one of the cartoon characters the studio created, with ink splatters everywhere. Also, the lit candles on the body rack aren't exactly pleasant either. All the while, pictures of Benny keep popping up in places you swear he wasn't before, as if he's watching you. Now, for one reason or another, you need to collect items scattered all around the studio that apparently had some connection with the staff in order to get the machine up and running. But once you finally hit that switch and return to the machine, you find the room being boarded up from the inside. And as you get closer and closer... Yeah, that nightmare pops out from behind the barricade as you run for your frickin' life. Ink pouring in from every wall and ceiling, only to stumble into something much darker than you first thought. And that's only episode 1. Episode 2 gets even more bizarre with cults, living ink monsters, and even more pants-pissingly terrifying encounters with Bendy. But for as weird as this game may seem, with all the ink monsters, the demonic antagonist, and the unholy contraption that seemingly is bringing all of them to life, the story of Bendy and the Ink Machine isn't as far-fetched as you might think. Yeah, the premise is a little goofy, no pun intended, but this isn't the first time that ink has come to life and attacked people. Back in 1781, Japanese scholar Toriyama Sekian compiled one of the country's largest collections of monsters, ghosts, and demons from legend and folklore called the Konjaku Hyaki Shui, or Supplement to the 100 Demons from the Present and Past. Within 3 volumes houses dozens if not hundreds of Japan and even China's most dangerous, bizarre, and recognizable creatures to have ever been recorded in history, such as the Tengu, the Nekomata, and the Kappa. But it was in the 3rd volume, Rain, where I found a supernatural monster that isn't so unlike Bendy, the Suzuri no Tamashi, or literally Inkstone Spirit. Similar to other thin yokai like Kasobake and Bakezori, even an inkstone can be possessed by spirits. For example, an inkstone that's been used to write the same stories or draw the same art over and over again will slowly begin to recreate aspects of the stories or art itself. First, it might be something simple like illusions of characters or faint phantom sounds, but over
Okay,
time, those characters
I
manifest
have
within
no
the
idea
ink.
what this is
At best,
talking
the
about,
spirits
or
will
if
only
he's real or
simply
not.
destroy the bulk of the art that's being created, but at worst, create so much havoc it ends up destroying the home of the artist or even the artist themselves. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, this folklore is all well and good, but is there any actual history behind the monster? Oh, you bet there freaking is! One of the most recorded and re-recorded stories of all of Japan's history was the Genpei War, a savage civil war that pitted the Taira clan against the Minamoto clan in bloody combat between 1180 and 1185.
Oh my
The
god.
final battle of the war was known as one of the most brutal and horrifying conflicts in Japanese history. the Battle of Dan no Ura. In it, the Taira were completely wiped out, and many of the soldiers who were slaughtered became onryo, basically spirits who died with so much emotional turmoil and anger that they couldn't pass into the next world. Now, during the decades of re-recording the accounts of the war, scholars said that they began to faintly hear the sounds of crashing waves and screams of men. And over time, they saw ships and soldiers manifesting in their ink. They believed that the onryo spirits of the soldiers infected their inkstones, haunting them with evil. So, in light of all this information about the Suzuri no Tamashi, what does it have to do with Bendy? Freaking everything! Think about it. The origin of the Suzuri no Tamashi is that its constant use over decades of writing or drawing the same thing over and over is what creates these haunting, evil ink demons. And when you consider 1920s animation consisted of countless cells of the same images over and over again, the connection could make sense. But that's not the only thing that could connect the two together. Remember, the ink itself doesn't just come to life out of nowhere. It's possessed and made manifest through the angry, grudge-filled ghosts of people who died under duress and rage. In Chapter 2, The Old Song, we learn more and more about the staff that worked in the studio, and needless to say, they were not a happy bunch.
So first, Joey installs this ink machine over our heads. Then it begins to leak. 3 times last month we couldn't even get out of our department because the ink had flooded the stairwell. Man, it's weird. Crazy weird. Because if he finds out I lost my keys again, I'm out of here.
The other thing is, given the fact the deeper we go in game, the more and more coffins we see, I think it's fair to assume that a lot of staff were either murdered or their bodies brought to the studio for whatever evil scheme is going on. And it's not long after you begin to encounter humanoid ink monsters that attack you, only to find out that not only are they old staff members like Sammy Lawrence who straight up recognizes you,
You look familiar to me.
but by their own volition, their angry, grudging spirits have been imprisoned with a body of ink.
This inky, dark abyss I call a body.
This is eerily similar to how the begrudged spirits of the Taira clan possessed and manifested in the ink of the Suzuri no Tamashi. Finally, the last thing to consider is the ink machine itself. The fact that it takes up half the name of the game leaves me with the impression that it plays a much larger role than we've seen so far in chapters 1 and 2, yet we know so little about it. I mean, granted, we hear about it a lot in the various audio logs, and to my understanding, the whole point in Henry coming back to the old studio was to find out what the ink machine actually does, but there's still so much up in the air. However, what we do know is that Ink Bendy and the other monsters don't come out until and only until the ink machine starts up. And again, I can't help but go back to the Suzuri no Tamashi. Cause remember, even though the begrudged spirits possess the ink, it's the stone itself that acts as the catalyst that brings the spirits to life within the ink. And just like the cursed ink stone, the ink machine has been around for decades, creating the same images of Bendy and the gang over and over through the 40 plus years the studio's been around. With all things considered, the begrudged, possibly murdered staff, the nature of the ink monsters, the nature of Bendy, and the old ink machine that brought them all to life, it's just way too similar to the Suzuri no Tamashi with its ability to bring evil spirits to life through its ink. But that's just my theory. I mean, the constant use of pentagrams and talk of sacrificial sheep leads me to believe that the demonic origins of Bendy is a more Judeo-Christian one. However, honestly, you never know. That's what makes these indie horror games so fascinating. It's not so much the horrific atmosphere and imagery, but the story and the origins of the story that gets people so invested in it. I mean, just look at FNAF. That game's been around since 2014, and people are still trying to figure out the whole story. I don't think anyone could argue that creating your own theories about the story in these games makes them so enjoyable. And as the game grows, I hope I can come back to it with some new theories, because this was a lot of fun to analyze. But thanks for watching, everyone, and a big thank you to both Matthew Meyer for his insane research on Japanese yokai, and the Living Tombstone for his amazing music. If you want to check out even more of my cultural theories in gaming, click those annotations on screen or links in the description, cause hey, who said you can't get smart from playing video games? And if you like these kind of videos, be sure to smash that subscribe button to stay up to date on every single new Game Theorist video. But until
You're good now.
next time, everyone, this is Gaijin Goomba.
Okay, well guys, that was the tragic birth of Bendy, the Game Theorist. I guess I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.